My name is John Miranda. I'm a director at Intel Corporation, and I run a market and technology trend sensing program that we call Trendscape. So for today, I wanted to talk, give a under the hood view of our program, our methodologies, some of the tools we use, and then touch on coronavirus, of course, and some early thoughts that are emerging there, and then close with Q&A. So I'll start going through the slides here. So when we're thinking about trend sensing in our corporate strategy framework, so Trendscape is the sensing on the yellow box here on the left. So and then from the trends that we're seeing, we then step into the interpretation. So what does it mean to Intel? What does it mean to the tech ecosystem? What's it mean to the world? And so developing a sharper point of view on how these trends are coming together and how they might play out. And from the interpretation, then we get into the acting, which is connecting with executives in the business units, in our corporate strategy office, in the strategic planning teams, and influencing an action to be taken. So a product roadmap change for our future products. So while the program I run is on the sensing side, a lot of thought really that I've been giving is the acting part, because that can be quite challenging, especially if you look at it from the executive point of view. They're constantly being flooded with inputs that says, you must act, this thing is coming, if you don't act, it's going to be a problem. So from their lens, it can be quite noisy. So how do you rise above that noise and zero in on the few things that matter the most? So in our program, the way we structured it is we built out a community. So we're not, it's not a department of people. So we tap into employees across the company that are viewed as thought leaders or very knowledgeable in different domains and expertise across the world. And so we're looking at, and we look at a broad set of topics, right, from macro trends that we're seeing, like the current coronavirus crisis, to new markets that are establishing, to thinking about AI, attitudes and experiences. How do we engage technology, and how is that evolving in the IoT space? So we're looking at a broad array of topics at different points in the horizon. And we run at a quarterly cadence. So once a quarter, we come together as a community. There's about 20 or 30 of us that come together, and we exchange, what are trends we're seeing, what are topics we're seeing that we think deserve more amplification within the company. So things that could become important, and we're sensing that the company as a whole isn't yet internalizing. So those are the types of topics that become candidates for our quarterly report that we build out from our meeting. We also augment with external points of view. So we're looking at, of course, the news, but looking at, different, what is Gartner saying, what are different agencies saying, and comparing that to what we're seeing, and is there agreement or dissonance? Are others outside of the company seeing things we're not, and vice versa? So enriching our point of view to also have an outside-in perspective. And then we publish a report every quarter, and then we distribute it across various stakeholders globally in the company. And then the last part, the most important, is engaging our key stakeholders and sharing the content and having dialogue on the content and what does it potentially mean to the company. And when we share trends and points of view, some are viewed as interesting, and that's fine, but then there are a few that resonate more richly with a particular executive, and that can lead to, let's do a more in-depth study and really try to understand what this trend or these sets of trends might mean to the company. And at that point, you'll get into, well, what is the ecosystem doing? What are potential outcomes and future scenarios that we can envision? What are the options that the company should be considering? So this is getting kind of into the more of the interpretation to inspire action within the company. So we have some tools that we use to help keep us organized. One is a knowledge management system by a company in Germany called Itonix. And so as in the course of the day, you may get emails from colleagues that say, hey, look at this particular story, or look at this particular event that just took place. This is interesting. And we get those emails from time to time, or you see these publications from time to time. But how do you keep that organized? Because at the end of the week, you may have 1,000 new emails, and that interesting signal is lost in the shuffle. So with this SaaS platform, we're able to capture the signals that, with one click on the browser, it adds it to a database. And then we can relate these signals to trends. So many signals can form a trend. And what this allows us to do is crowdsource our kind of intelligence gathering, our scouting, if you will, of signals, and periodically step back and go, okay, what's happening in this particular topic, and see all the signals that have come forward supporting that trend over a period of time, and that helps provide a holistic view of what's happening in that particular space. One other capability the tool Itonix supports, which we have also used, is out of these signals and trends, you can invite a community to ideate what are potential opportunities or threats that those signals and trends might drive, and then have the community, harvest from the community a set of opportunities or threats, and then engage the community to prioritize them in terms of, what's the probability of occurrence? What would be the impact if it happens? How far out into the future do we think it is? How important is it to our company? And then as a community, we can come together and look at are we in agreement? Are we in dissonance? Are we seeing it the same way? And have those types of conversations on the few opportunities that we think deserve the most focus. And working at Intel, of course, it's a big, heterogeneous and complex company with over 100,000 employees. But often when you make the case with various executives, it can help bolster it if there's some set of indicators behind it. So we have some tools that we use. One, for example, is looking at news chatter over time. Is this really happening? Is this accelerating? What's happening there? We can look at academic output. Is the academic output accelerating? Are we seeing some trends there that deepen our conviction that something is starting to accelerate? We can look at investment trends. In aggregate, we can look at patent trends and see, how is there a story forming there for a particular topic that we're interested in exploring. Another framework that we've used as well, so I'll answer as we go, as I can. So the question is, what are the criteria for selection of the participants to this community? It's somewhat, I'll connect with the person, and it's basically an interview. It's assessing, are they informed? Is there evidence that they're intellectually curious? Do they have a passion for contributing insights to the company? Do they bring unique perspectives to the table? Do they offer something we don't have? Like maybe it's someone in a geography that we don't, our community isn't well represented because we're trying to think globally. So maybe there's someone from Japan or India that really wants to contribute, or maybe they have deep domain expertise. They could be an external keynote presenter on, for example, cybersecurity, and they're deeply informed in cybersecurity, and that's something we want to have included in our community. So it's a combination of the above. It's just kind of assessing if they have the passion, the intellectual curiosity, and bring something to the table. There's no formal criteria. And for all these folks, they're Intel employees and they have their day jobs. So these are things that they're contributing above and beyond because they have a passion in helping shape company direction. Thank you for the question. So one framework we have also leveraged is thinking when looking at trends, plotting them on an axis where on the x-axis we're looking at intensity. So how big is it? Like for example, if we measure it in terms of news stories, is there a lot of publication around that topic, or is there a very light level of publication on that topic? And then on the y-axis, we look at what's the year-over-year growth rate, like how fast is it growing? So what this framework might reveal is there topics that may have less, and this, by the way, these are just examples, right? These are not plotted correctly, but for the visualization. But in this case, what this would suggest is, let's say, for example, generative AI at a point in time did not have a lot of stories, but it's growing at a pretty fast clip. So we might expect it to drift to the right over time. So it's a way to help uncover trends that are not getting a lot of pickup today, but are growing pretty rapidly. One topic that sometimes comes up, and I've been asked before, is, well, what can we use AI? Like, can we use tools to help uncover things for us? So the point of view I have on AI as it applies as a tool to help us uncover things that we may not be sensing. A colleague of mine has a doctorate in mathematics, and I love how she explained what AI is. So first of all, AI, when it was originally coined, is a very broad topic. It includes the study of human psychology and you know how machines behave. But in more recent times, there's a branch of AI called machine learning, and a sub-branch of machine learning called deep learning. And a lot of when we hear about AI in the contemporary recent past, it tends to often revolve around deep learning techniques, not exclusively, but quite a bit. And if you think about deep learning, one way to think about what AI in this context is it's a mathematical measurement of how close or how far apart are things. And if you think a lot of recent examples of AI, and I'm using AI loosely in quotes here, in computation, it's really measuring. A lot of them can be really thought back to this very simple concept, you know, how it's assessing how close are two things to each other mathematically, or how far apart is something from something else, or are they related? So for example, for image classification, it's a mathematical function that's measuring, is this picture of a dog, you know, how far is it from a statistical representation of what a dog looks like? So for purposes of trend sensing, AI can be helpful in understanding if things are related and close to each other, or if there's an anomaly, if something kind of stands out and is different from the others, and that might help you zero in on a unique thing. But AI in a contemporary sense, it's still very nascent in terms of reasoning and understanding by analogy and understanding the way humans do. So there are very real limitations on what you can do. But so going to machine learning, one tool we've used successfully is by a company called Quid in San Francisco. And in this example, I ran it for coronavirus and technology and trends. And this tool scans, you know, thousands of publications and blogs. It has over 1 billion, you know, articles in its database. And it comes back, each dot represents a story or an article. And you can click into it. And the connections between the dots, the lines connecting the nodes, represent a shared unique reference, that there's, you know, maybe there's some shared unique words or cross-references. And the tool does clustering. So which things seem to be closer to each other and which things are more distant from others. So when I ran this query for technology trends and coronavirus, I'm trying to understand. So I know my topic. I know I'm interested in coronavirus, but what I don't know, perhaps, is what's the sphere of things that are happening around and related. So these are kind of these unknowns surrounding a known. And so I start seeing, okay, there's some issues around image recognition. privacy and smartphones. I might want to dig into that and see what's happening there. There's some issues around, virtual life, sports, telemedicine, telecommuting, of course, which so many of us are doing, issues around education, collaboration tools such as Zoom, some other, another cluster, it might be related to that one. I should have merged them around phone location privacy, the economy, and the environment. So now knowing this, I can start thinking and digging into some of those articles. So what I'm going to share are some initial thoughts on coronavirus that emerged from digging in. So, we know that with our stay-at-home orders that are impacting so many of us, our children are being educated in a home environment. So we know that. But one of the things that we're also seeing is it's greatly amplifying inequality. At schools, like in the United States, our public school system can be viewed as an equalizer, where you bring kids from different socioeconomic backgrounds. That's the aspiration, right? Into a shared setting. But now, when you're at home, what happens to the child whose family does not have high-speed internet? And it becomes a huge deficit to their education. And if you look at wealthy countries as well, Austria, Switzerland, Norway, for example, 95% of students have a PC. But look at Indonesia, only 34% do. How will those countries or those children impacted, achieve their education? And so some plausible questions that started emerging in my mind is thinking in the U.S. Is this going to lead to more conversation around nationalizing high-speed internet? It becomes a utility such as electricity or water because it becomes so vital at a higher level than it has maybe been recognized in the pre-coronavirus era. So I see a couple of questions here. Let me touch back. So what amount of deep learning is being used to solve COVID-19? I would imagine data scientists are going through, are spending a lot of energy in exploring COVID-19 from many angles. From if you can get the data set, that's the challenge. Can you get enough of a big data set so you can start looking at populations and treatments and outcomes, and deep learning is good at exposing characteristics you may not know about. So here's this massive amount of data set. What are the patterns that enable you to classify if a person may get the disease or how they will respond to a particular treatment or respond to the disease? Why do some people get really sick and some barely have symptoms at all? Like science doesn't understand that. But if you can get enough data, deep learning techniques can be applied to try to see if you could surface some of the characteristics that distinguish those two populations. A question by Gabrielle. In your opinion, what is the first step to initiate such type of foresight program in a company? How Intel began it? In my particular case, my predecessor and my management had the vision to create this program. They created an opening. I applied. I got the job, and so I was fortunate that some of those battles were, kind of making the case were raised before my taking this role. But it's something that requires continuous nurturing. It's not, you start doing it and it just lasts. A lot of these programs, can come and go. And it requires constant nurturing and demonstrating that it's providing value to the company in order to sustain them over time. That is the question that I was trying to raise. Thank you, Andrea. Is the internet access becoming a new human right? To get through your day, increasingly, a smartphone or having access to computation is becoming increasingly vital for transportation, for services, for payment, for access to knowledge. It's becoming as vital as electricity and water, in my view, for so many of us. and for many it already is. Other observations about coronavirus that were inspired by digging into some of the news that emerged from that cluster map is telehealth restrictions are being waived in the United States. So, perhaps telehealth was going to arrive at some point in the future. Maybe 10 years from now, we might have seen, 5 years to 10 years from now, we might have seen some initial telehealth arriving. I think coronavirus just brought the future in by 10 years, 5 to 10 years. And by the way, it also includes in the U.S. the payer system. So the insurance company being willing to reimburse a doctor who provided a consultation via a computer as opposed to in person, which starts unlocking the ability for doctors to provide these consultations and get paid for their services. And below, I thought it was interesting looking at pet care, even a consultation with your veterinarian by video. And on the right, I thought this was an interesting graphic on showing how analytics and big data analytics and how it might start informing our citizenry, as well as raising privacy concerns. But there's a company called Kinsa that sells smart thermometers. And so what this plot shows as of March 20th is a heat map of where abnormal body temperatures in aggregate were detected. So you could see Florida and New York City. So this heat map could help inform, potential emerging hotspots for management of this pandemic, which is an example of analytics in aggregate. Do I use tools other than QUID? Yeah, so we can look at for academic output, for example, Scopus is a source. There's and then other agencies like CB Insights for M&A investment can be or PitchBook can be another source for M&A investment. So there's other services that are available. As far as drones, I think in some settings we might see an expansion of drones for delivering medication, like let's say remote villages or areas that are hard to get to. I think in denser urban settings that's still going to be more challenging just because of the number of obstacles and complexity in managing a more intense urban space. So let me keep going a couple more slides. And so now thinking about technology as well in the context of coronavirus, how do we deal with loneliness? Some of us are staying at home with family members, but some of us are staying at home by ourselves. And, is this going to expand and change behaviors on how humans engage technology to maintain a sense of connection with others, with friends? We're seeing birthday parties being hosted via Zoom. Within Intel, within the department I'm connected with, we have done some happy hours Friday at 5 p.m. from our virtual respective locations, where sometimes you see a child running in the background, and we're having our glass of wine and our favorite Hawaiian shirt or hat, depending on the theme that is chosen. So using these tools to enrich how we connect with others, I think we're going to see we are seeing a sharp rise on that. And sports has been idled across many parts of the world. So can we anticipate seeing gaming and other uses in technology rising to fill that void? So that's another example. And these are technology centric because the search I did was in the context of technology and coronavirus. That was the area of exploring that I was following here. Another one is, so this is 5 minutes from my house in Tucson, Arizona, and this was taken yesterday at a nearby quiet spot. It's a way to avoid the intense news cycle, is to go to a beautiful quiet spot in nature. And I took this picture, and the one thing that struck me in this picture, normally there's a lot of jet contrails right around here, because this is an artery, a travel lane, high altitude travel lane for planes coming and going to California. And there's constantly trails that are on the sky that would mar the picture, but there are none now. And so it does provide a reflection around the environment, sustainability. While this disease is so tragic for humanity, it is a byproduct as we're seeing nature heal, from the canal in Venice having clarity that has not been seen in recent human memory, to reports we're seeing of parts of India being able to see the Himalayas in ways that have not been seen for many decades. And so one area that we've been tracking too is the topic of sustainability and the role of sustainability and technology. And will coronavirus accelerate once we're out of the urgent mode of this crisis? Will it accelerate a sense of humans, being reminded that we're all in this together, and what happens in one part of the world can very much affect another part of the world? And so thinking about sustainability in the context of technology, so are we seeing news stories in terms as well as sustainability and brand in technology brands? Are we seeing a rising affinity there? And we're seeing signals from key cloud service providers, Google and Amazon making unprecedented purchases of renewable and green energy, to Jeff Bezos declaring $10 billion of his personal fortune. He made that declaration in January to address climate. We're starting to see signals of, client devices like laptops, HP coming out with a model that is using recycled plastic. And if you've been watching the news, Apple just introduced their Mac Air very, very recently, I think in the last week. And if you go to apple.com and you go about this computer, look at the detail on the Mac Air, and you scroll down, there's the usual, it talks about the better display and the faster processing and the better keyboard and so on. But as you slide to the bottom, there's a whole section now on this model emits over 40% less carbon footprint than the prior model, and that the aluminum shell is made out of recycled metal. So are these signals that we can expect to see technology play a broader role in thinking about sustainability? A month ago, I don't think you would have seen that in Apple.com's website that explicitly talking about one of their products. Let's see. Question from Christopher. After signals and insights gain support from sponsors, when do you start prototyping, testing, or validating the strategy with users, connection to design understanding, design thinking, and design doing? So as we're trying to understand a particular topic, we will do market research to understand the sentiment. Let's say in the case of this laptop, if technology companies produce a laptop that's greener for whatever set of characteristics, maybe it's right to repair, that you can replace the battery, you can make it last longer, it's more recycled, it's more conscientious of energy management, not only for the device, but maybe accessories. Like, for example, when I'm not looking at a pace out of the room, should my external display immediately go off and conserve that energy? And how much would that energy conservation matter across tens of millions, hundreds of millions of external displays in offices globally? So here's the question where we would do market research, is to test would the consumers and would IT decision makers be willing to pay for that? Would they give up a feature to gain this laptop that, let's say, for example, would have a green sticker or some kind of a character, designation that it's greener? If you went to a store and there's 10 machines and one of them is greener, would you give up some other feature? Because it might cost some money to implement features on that machine that achieve a higher state of green, if you will. And that's so that would be an example of market research that would be done to help inform kind of UX or design thinking. So going forward, one other framework that we've also applied is thinking, what are technology trends we're seeing, that are facing inflection points, for example, and then also thinking about it from the lens of markets, society, government, regulatory, and we may be tracking many different trends, but thinking about their interaction, and in particular thinking about a known or unknown market demand or need or a job to be done. So in this example, if you think about sustainability and a rising agitation from many of us and urgency to address it, and you think about energy production, that by tradition the utilities would generate the energy and send the electrons in one direction to our houses and our businesses, but increasingly we're generating our own energy now, right, with solar panels in our roofs. And increasingly, battery technology has been improving very rapidly. So now, if I start thinking about all these things together, we're harvesting our own energy. We have the ability to start storing our energy, and we have the ability to start consuming it with our electric vehicles. Well, what does that mean in terms of thinking about the grid, which was designed in the in the 30s or 40s perhaps? And the architecture of it was designed to move electricity generally in one direction. Can we make the grid smarter so that it's better utilizing and tapping into these energy sources that are now moving in a more complex and multi-directional way? If my car is plugged into the house, electric car, is it part of the grid? Can it be tapped into to satisfy a spike in energy? Can we use AI and analytics to better understand and predict spikes in energy requirement? In the U.S., my understanding is that the utilities have to generate 15% surplus energy to prevent blackouts. So because at any given moment, supply and demand must be equal. If we have a more intelligent grid, could we reduce that and not be generating energy that is essentially not consumed and reduce the carbon footprint associated with it? So that's an example of trying to think about different technologies that are coming online and different forces that are happening in the world, and how might they interact and what might that mean. So from an Intel perspective, so putting my Intel hat on for a moment, it might imply that we might need more computation to more intelligently manage future grids as compared to, so the grid might turn into a computer, if you will, and Intel may be able to play a role there, for example. Robert, I have a question from Robert. Thank you. I'm curious about the elbow grease involved in an initiative like this. How do you budget for the people-hour cost to gather the signals and for analysis? So I have a certain amount of budget for research. As far as contributors to our program, many, they're essentially already doing their full-time job somewhere. At least I can speak for Intel's culture. People are not typically micromanaged to the level where if they want to dial in a few hours a quarter to support an initiative, it's generally viewed as fine, so they don't have to answer to that level of detail. So if someone has a passion and they have point of view and perspectives, they can participate, and there's no staffing cost there because they're full-time doing some other function. Now for tools like Quid and the research and my role, yeah, there is a cost. And the elbow grease there is to continuously demonstrate value, that the sensing we're doing, the interpretation that's coming out of it is influencing and shaping decision making, and that the executives we closely partner with assert they're getting value. It's showing them things that they didn't think about that could affect their business. And when you get those kinds of endorsements, then you get to stay in business and continue doing what I'm doing. If you don't get those endorsements, then your budgeting and your funding for this type of program is put at risk. Can you share another question from Ali? Thank you for the questions. Can you share more about how you think about distance and proximity when looking at articles? So one way, and again, so if you think about natural language processing tools that do clustering, one way that you can think two articles are closely connected is when they share very unusual terms in common. So if two articles have the word dog or cat or computer, you can't really tell much about it because so many news articles have those very common words. But if two articles share a very unique term like homomorphic encryption, now they're probably more closely aligned because those are terms that don't pop up very often. So NLP tools can understand that these things are probably related, and they're mathematically, these two documents are mathematically close to each other because they share very unique terms that normally don't arise very often. So think about term frequency, and articles that share infrequently used terms is a way to understand that they're close to each other. How's the impact of this kind of program measure inside Intel? It's often getting testimonial from executives and counterparts in our business units and a corporate strategy office that you know, basically are supportive of the program, that they view the program adds value. Now, one area that, at least within Intel, that I've discovered is if you raise trends and you raise some interesting content and you engage your business unit, you know, once a quarter, or your key stakeholders once a quarter, and you go away, that's not enough, right? At that point, yeah, this is an interesting, you know, a person in a corporate group that comes in and gives us an interesting presentation every so often, but we're not really quite sure, you know, what else they do. But when you do make that presentation, when some topics land and an executive, you know, is interested, you know, being able to roll up your sleeves and partner with, maybe they have embedded analysts and strategic planners in their organization, right, and collaborating richly and helping them help understand and make better decision making, and you know be a partner, then I think that's when your credibility and your relationship rises. Now you're more than just a person that comes in every so often with an interesting presentation. But it takes work. It's the breadth versus depth, and balancing how much time you have, because it takes more time to get more richly connected with a key customer. So you have to prioritize within a large, at least in a large context in a company as large as Intel, who are your most important customers, and where do you want to spend the most focus in providing a richer analysis for. Will quantum compute play a major role in the future of technology? Possible soon. So there's different views in quantum computing, even within Intel and in the industry. Today, the state-of-the-art, so this is a little bit orthogonal, but I'm happy to talk about it. The state-of-the-art in quantum computing is in a range of, one way to measure how big a quantum computer is a notion of qubits. So the state-of-the-art is, let's say, 50 to 100 qubits. The sense is to do real, you know, commercial work and solve problems that classical computers cannot solve today. You may need tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of qubits in order to achieve and solve problems that a classical computer cannot wrap its head around. And examples that are drawing a lot of interest are, for example, discovering a vaccine for coronavirus. What better tool than a quantum computer to simulate quantum processes? So if I have a virus and I'm trying to develop a compound that attaches itself to that virus, right? Those are quantum interactions. So a quantum computer, the promise is can lend itself really well to you know, looking at the sphere of possibilities and recommend compounds that merit investigation as novel therapy that a classical computer cannot do very well, because as the number of electrons and protons and so on in atoms and compounds rise, the possibilities that a classical computer has to try out rises exponentially. But with a quantum computer, it can try all states, at the same time, if you will, and find solutions that a classical computer cannot identify. So as we think about forces and trends, it's often the intersection of them that is of interest, that can create more intellectual interest in thinking about how future scenarios might play out. So encourage thinking about that intersection of different forces that you're seeing, thinking about it from again, government, regulatory, societal, technology, what's changing and how do these forces interact and come together to help ideate plausible future scenarios, and for those scenarios, what would be the potential implications for society, or if you work in a particular company, for the company that you're providing insights to. One other topic that this is a slide created by a friend of mine, Stan Vidikas, and I really love this slide because no matter how insightful the content you create, if you don't have a trusted relationship with who you're trying to land it with, you're unlikely to have impact. So in thinking about stakeholders that I partner with within the company, I love this continuum because it can be humbling too, by the way, but it helps you assess where are you in this continuum. So are you irrelevant? Do they even know you exist? You may be off creating wonderful insights, but if they don't even know who you are, then what's the point, right? Perhaps you're farther along. They know who you are. They respect you, and they'll listen to you. So that might look in the form of a staff might invite you and give you time in their agenda from time to time and hear what you have to say. So that's good. You cracked a door open. At least they may be listening to what you have to say. But as you work your way up, are you included? And an example there might be this staff is going to have a strategic face-to-face somewhere, and they're going to map out next year's plans. And they think to invite you, even though you're not a member of that team, because they feel having you there will enrich the outcomes of their strategic planning. So do you get an invitation like that, or do you find out after the fact that staff met and they didn't think to include you because they didn't really they'll hear you, but they didn't think you have that big a role to play in their direction setting. And then empowered, this is now when the leader of that organization starts entrusting you with their organization and perhaps talking on behalf of their organization and representing them in a way where there's a very high level of trust. And full partner may be where you're a trusted confidant, where that leader will always reach out to you before making an important decision, or maybe if they're out, ask you to represent them in a very rich way. And it's very difficult to get to the right here. If you have a major stakeholder and you're a full partner, it's probably because you did a lot of work to get to that point. But it's important to understand for your key stakeholders, where are you and where do you want to be? So this is a slide that's helped me think about where I sit in that continuum. Yes, I can share the slides afterwards. Is there a way to get a copy of the slides? Yes, we can share the slide. Another question by Martini. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. Foresight is often perceived as a holistic expertise. How do you support this from Intel? Does your technological foresight need to be combined with the thematic expertise within the client? So this is a good question. We try to balance technology because we're a technology company. It's easy to have a view that's overly technology-centric and missing things like, how do people engage technology? Do you trust it? How many of us have the stickers in front of our cameras because we don't trust the technology that the camera might turn on when it shouldn't, right? So understanding human behavior, how are we going to deal with issues around privacy, dealing with COVID-19, with some countries using image analysis to track people and track their movements and ensure that they're following instructions on staying home, right? I think China is probably on that end, and the EU has more notions of protecting privacy, and maybe these concepts would be less accepted among members in the European community, that cameras are everywhere and they can recognize you. How would you like a service where you're at a restaurant and someone can aim a camera at you in their phone and it immediately tells your name? I think for some of us anyways, that would be an uncomfortable notion. The technology is there to do that. So the technology is there, but thinking about how society feels about it is important as well to balance it out. On the future of work and teleworking, telecommuting, we're learning as fast as everyone else. We're seeing an enormous shift. I think the CEO of Zoom spoke or wrote a blog a couple weeks ago, and he said in December, Zoom's maximum participant count in any one given day in December of 2019, if I remember, it was something like 10 million people. And at the end of March, it was 200 million people. So their business grew, by that measure, 20x in one quarter. Of course, the airlines and other industries are seeing it in the opposite direction. The question is this going to be sticky? Like, what happens after these waves of the crisis are behind us? Will new habits be ingrained and formed where we may now question the need to have in-person meetings, whereas before maybe we would have gone on a plane to have a face-to-face, and I'm sure that will still happen in the future, but now maybe we'll test the question, hey, it seems like we were able to successfully achieve our results via video conference. It saves expense, and if you think about sustainability, it can reduce the carbon footprint. So habits, we're going to be doing this for months, I think, and it's going to be waves. It could be for over a year. I don't know if folks on the call noted, but I read a signal that Microsoft declared their key conferences are going to be virtual through July 2021, not 2020, right? So think about, that's a lot of time for new habits and skills to be developed in using interactive tools. The one change I'm seeing is most often, at least within Intel, I was primarily using audio only, and now I'm seeing a lot more video as well as audio in some of our internal work. So that's a change I'm seeing already happening. So I do think that will definitely reshape the future of work. I think those trends were already happening. What we're seeing is it just brought it in 5 or 10 years. I think the future was going to be for knowledge workers to be more distributed and more virtual. And we were moving in that direction. Tools, technology, bandwidth, connectivity, it's all getting better, has been getting better. But I think this event just sharply accelerated these trends and brought them in. Maybe they would have taken 5 to 10 years to happen, and they're happening now. The nature of work so Patty has a question around the nature of work as it relates to organizational structures and implications for what people study in the future as more robots will reduce human labor demand. So I did read some signals that highly automated are handling coronavirus better than those that are highly manual because the density of people to keep your operation running is a lot lower. If you think about a fab clean room in Intel, it's one of the cleanest environments on Earth, and you're in a complete moon suit, right? So, I think factories with high degree of automation experience less impact than those that are very labor intensive, where people are more closely tied together. In terms of organizational structures, I think there was a company called Automatic, and it was an interesting interview with their CEO. They're a company of 1,200, as I recall, 1,200 employees. They're completely distributed. So they have no central office, right? It's 1,200 people all over the planet. And they grew up that way. So their corporate culture has evolved and been designed around a completely distributed workforce. One of the interesting things is they don't use email as often as many of us. They use, based on the interview with the CEO, I recall they use more kind of different team structure sites where people are contributing into shared information channels as opposed to emails. And they also view synchronous versus asynchronous collaboration through a different lens than, let's say, companies that were formed in a different way, where they may not have as many meetings where they're all together at the same time to share information. They're doing it asynchronously as they're all around the world in different time zones. So they're an interesting case example on a structure and not just working from home, but how do they get their work done is different for a company that was founded in a completely virtual way. The name of the company is Automatic. I think it has 2 C's. I'm going off memory here. I think they, there was and they have interesting models. Like they do believe in face-to-face. So the team comes together within cost reason. They get to pick the city because there is no home office, right? So if you got 20 people and they're in this part of the world, pick a city. They all come together. And by the way, once they figure out their lodging, their Airbnb, where they have their actual meeting, the hosting site, and so on and so forth, they can save that trip template. So if another team with employees in the same part of the world want to meet there, they don't have to reinvent the wheel. They can just look at what a prior team did and follow that model, that template that they created. Yes, I believe that is the company. Yeah, so this is, we already asked various questions around, would like to hear from folks offline. How do you sense trends? How do you activate them in particular? How do you land them with your stakeholders such that they do something with it? How, any kind of bright spots or learnings on how you've raised your degree of involvement or pain points, things that you're struggling with. I'd love to learn from you too as we continue this conversation. With that, that's all I have. My email is there. And really thank you for your time and your questions and our hosts for bringing us all together.